Now, Wednesday's groundbreaking ceremony for a new Washington, D.C. memorial for disabled veterans. Speakers include Veterans Affairs Secretary Eric Shinseki, actor Gary Sinise, and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. This is an hour.
And now, for those who can, please rise for the presentation of the colors and the singing of our national anthem. Advance the colors.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the retiring of the colors. And now please welcome our Master of Ceremonies, former Secretary of Veterans Affairs, the Honorable Anthony Principi.
Thank you. Please be seated. Good morning, and let me add my welcome to all of you, our special guests and our longtime friends at this special gathering, Speaker Pelosi, Veterans Affairs Secretary Shinseki, Congressman Mike Rogers, Deputy Secretary of Transportation Pocari. Welcome, and thank you all for being here. Foundation Chairman Lois Pope, President Art Wilson, and the entire Board of Directors, Disabled American Veterans National Commander Walter E. Tyson, and my colleague, former VA Deputy Secretary Gordon Mansfield. It is indeed an honor and privilege to have you all with us. Thank you for being part of this event to break ground for the American Veterans Disabled for Life Memorial. This will be the first national tribute to the service and sacrifice of America's disabled veterans, and to celebrate the inspiring accomplishments of these brave men and women. They are the reason we are so dedicated to creating a memorial in their honor in our nation's capital. And as part of that effort, this year a commemorative coin dollar was produced by the United States Mint to help fund the memorial. Today, there are more than 3 million disabled veterans, and many thousands of American service members have been wounded or otherwise disabled in Iraq, Afghanistan, and the war on terrorism. The values of those we honor are values that have sustained our nation throughout our history. The values of duty, of honor, and of country. These men and women carried the torch of freedom high when they were called upon to do so. Many of them paid a high price for their service in our nation's defense. Those disabilities, lifelong disabilities, are part of the continuing cost of war. And that's why it is so important that the American Veterans Disabled for Life Memorial become a reality. We need an inspiring reminder to future generations who will visit this site, and a tribute to the service and sacrifice that these young men and women made for our nation and the ideals of freedom and democracy that we hold so dear. So let's get things started this morning with an invocation by VA Chaplain Clarence Cross. Chaplain Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. May we bow our heads in a moment of prayer. Dear Lord, we come today in a spirit of reflection, thanksgiving, and some sense of joy as we recognize and celebrate our brave men and women who face danger and wounds in defense of the freedom of our nation, and through your providence were allowed the opportunity to return home to their country and to their loved ones. So we ask for your continued blessings on those who served and also on this very special occasion as we break ground for the Disabled American Veterans for Life Memorial. It is very proper that we should be here because this memorial will forever remind us of the suffering, of the service, and of the sacrifice of those who returned but still carry the wounds of war daily. We pray that this memorial will be a source of inspiration and encouragement for all to experience. We also recognize that this day and occasion is made possible through the diligent work and contribution of Ms. Lois Pope and Mr. Arthur Wilson, along with the late Jesse Brown, Secretary Jesse Brown. For this, we also offer thanks. We ask blessings on all in attendance today and for their work, care, and concern. In your many names, Lord, we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Chaplain Cross, for those very inspiring words of prayer. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce someone who is truly an inspiration to share some personal thoughts and insights into what this memorial means to disabled veterans. Nancy Pelosi is in her second term as Speaker of the House of Representatives, having made history in 2007 when she was elected the first woman to serve as Speaker of the House. Key legislative accomplishments under her leadership include a new GI education bill for veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and increased services for the veterans, caregivers, and Veterans Administration, advanced appropriations for veterans' health care, and many others. Representative Pelosi made history in November 2002 when House Democrats elected her the first woman to lead a major political party. She brings to the Speaker's role more than 3 years of experience in the House, representing the city of San Francisco since 1987. Before being elected Democratic leader, she served as House Democrat Whip for 1 year. Speaker Pelosi comes from a strong family tradition of public service. Her late father, Thomas D'Alessandro Jr., served as the mayor of Baltimore for 12 years, after representing the city for 5 terms in Congress. Her brother, Thomas D'Alessandro III, also served as mayor of Baltimore. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi.
Good morning. And what a beautiful morning it is, so appropriately, so that we can have a perfect day to take an action, as the chaplain said, that it is appropriate for us to do. I want to thank Anthony, Secretary Principi. We Italian Americans take great pride in each other's work, and I thank him for his generous introduction and for your service, Mr. Secretary, winning the Bronze Star for Valor in the Navy and earning respect for our nation's veterans as Secretary of Veterans Affairs. We're all very, very proud of you, and it is appropriate that you lead our presentation today. It's an honor to be here with Secretary Shinseki, a great leader of the Department of Veterans Affairs. He, too, a decorated soldier in his own right, firmly committed to the health, well-being, and future of all veterans. Thank you, Mr. Secretary Shinseki. I first met him in, I think, in Bosnia, just outside of Sarajevo. So we went to visit him there to see his leadership, his concern for our troops. Our subject then was troop protection, force protection, and that has always been your priority, as well as the security of the American people. I'd like to acknowledge and join the Secretary in acknowledging so many people who are responsible for making today possible, who also are so responsible for protecting the American people. Bobby Barrera, Chairman of the Board, Lois Pope, Co-founder and Chairman, Arthur Wilson and Mary, Co-founder and President, and all of the leaders of the Disabled Veterans Life Memorial Foundation, for your dedication to this cause and for your determination to do right by our wounded soldiers. I know that, I believe Gary Sinise, thank him for serving as the national spokesperson for this memorial. In doing so, and as his service to our country, always being there for our veterans, he has matched the brilliance of his celebrity with the dedication and passion, commitment to our veterans. Very generously, the Secretary referenced my family. 4 of my brothers were veterans, served in the military. When I was a girl, my father brought the Baltimore Orioles to Maryland, and they had to build a stadium, and when they built the stadium, what would they name it? There was all kinds of competition. But it was clear the consensus choice would be to call it Baltimore Memorial Stadium in honor of the service of our veterans, so that everyone who went there would always know that as we went forward, we did so with our veterans and those who lost their lives in their hearts. It said on that stadium, "Time will not dim the glory of their deeds." Every memorial to our veterans shares that thought, and so too today. I want to acknowledge Chairman Mr. Rogers, soon-to-be chairman. I assume Mr. Rogers is here, and I want to acknowledge him. And also, I wanted to acknowledge those who made this legislation possible. In the Senate, Max Cleland and John McCain, bipartisan all the way. In the House, Sam Johnson, Congressman Sam Johnson, a decorated hero, all of them, and John Murtha. I'm sorry that Jack Murtha can't be around or here with us today, because this was such a high priority for him. There was no question but that the funding for this memorial would happen, and so I want to acknowledge all of their strong leadership. Because today in breaking ground on the American Veterans Disabled for Life Memorial, we set down a marker in that same tradition to remember the true cost of war, as the Secretary said, and cost of war and conflict to our troops and their families. We pay tribute to the sacrifice of those who served and came home changed forever, but not their spirit, just physically, and gave a part of their lives abroad so that we could be safe at home. In a bipartisan way, we in Congress know that protecting the American people is our first responsibility, and our veterans do just that. And when they are disabled, we need to be there for them and make sure everyone remembers the sacrifice. President Kennedy, who was elected president 2 days ago, 50 years ago, this week, 50 years ago, said, "We will pay any price." You know the rest of the quote. Pay any price. Many of you have paid more of a price than the rest of us. We need to acknowledge that in every way. Again, as the Secretary said, I'm very proud of some of the work that was done in the Congress for our veterans, but I want to make the additional point that when we did the new GI Bill and increased the timely and reliable funding for the VA, the veterans budget, passed the largest increase in veterans health care, invested billions of dollars for our veterans. These were priorities that the veterans brought to us. There's so many needs, and we do meet on a regular basis to say, what are the priorities? Is it the veterans disability tax, the concurrent receipt? Is it survivor benefits? What are the priorities? And those were our marching orders. So I thank my colleagues for their leadership, but more important than that, I thank the veterans community for making all of that possible under the leadership of President Barack Obama. Together, all of these accomplishments are bigger than anything since the original GI Bill in 1944. I think as we come together here, it is important to acknowledge that we still have some needs that we have to address. We will fight to ensure that veterans' health does not become privatized. That's very important for us. But again, we need your priorities to go forward. In the name of all veterans, past, present, and future, we break ground today to ensure that time does not dim the glory of their deeds, that time holds these deeds in the highest esteem, that flame at the center of the memorial, the flame of their deeds burns eternal. Very important. I myself, my uncle, Johnny D'Alessandro, died at the Battle of the Bulge. There wasn't a day that went by that my father didn't mourn the loss of his brother, but also take the enormous pride in the sacrifice that his brother, our family, made for our country. And so the tributes to those who lost their lives continues. But today, we take a very specific step in recognizing those who are disabled and who still continue to contribute to the strength of America in so many ways. As we approach Veterans Day, we reaffirm our commitment to the patriotism, the courage, and service of all men and women in uniform, whether they're in the theater of battle or wherever they serve our country. Because of them, because of you, we are the land of the free and the home of the brave. In building this memorial, we are taking the critical step forward in fulfilling our pledge that just as our troops leave no one behind on the battlefield, when they come home, we leave no veteran behind. Thank you to all of you who are working to make this memorial a reality. God bless our veterans. God has truly blessed America with our veterans, and God bless America. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for caring for our men and women in uniform and our nation's veterans. Roberto Bobby Barrera is truly an extraordinary man who knows how to get the job done. Bobby has been the man out front in the veterans community for a number of years. He is the immediate past National Commander of the Disabled American Veterans and currently serves as chairman of the organization's board of directors. Bobby is a combat disabled U.S. Marine Corps veteran of the Vietnam War. He was seriously injured in 1969 when enemy forces exploded a 500-pound bomb beneath the armored personnel carrier he was traveling in. The explosion and fire that ripped through the vehicle burned Bobby over 40% of his body. Battling courageously to overcome the physical and mental challenges he faced, Bobby earned his bachelor's degree in psychology at St. Mary's University and later earned a Master of Education degree in guidance and counseling at Sul Ross State University. In addition to teaching high school, his career has included positions of leadership and management as a juvenile probation counselor and as the director of the Family Support Center at Laughlin Air Force Base in Texas. Bobby has received numerous awards and honors, among them the DAV Outstanding Disabled Veteran of the Year and Life's Presidential Unsung Hero Award. Bobby is a leader, but his humility and his compassion have touched the lives of fellow disabled veterans and their families as few others have done. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to present to you Bobby Barrera.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. And a good morning to everyone. This is truly a remarkable day. We are here to mark a major milestone in the quest to create the first national memorial honoring the service and the sacrifice of our nation's disabled veterans. And I want to thank each one of you for being here with us this morning. The American Veterans Disabled for Life Memorial that will rise from the ground that we drag today will make a very, very powerful statement. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean? Last year, we participated in a flyover at the Indy 500 race as the opening ceremony, a two-ship of B-25's bombers flew over the race ceremonies. However, on the 2 days before the actual race, orientation flights in these aircraft, World War II B-25 bombers, were provided to certain VIPs. And I say the most important of those VIPs were returning troops who had been injured in Iraq and in Afghanistan. One of these men that was present had been paralyzed from the waist down. His father pushed the young man in his wheelchair. To enter the V-25 bomber, one has to climb up a steep ladder under the belly of the aircraft. I had already flown in it, so I knew what a challenge it would be for this young man to enter the aircraft. And I kept thinking to myself, how is he going to enter this aircraft? When it was time for the young man's flight, the father rolled the wheelchair right under the aircraft. He walked around, knelt in front of the wheelchair with his back to his son. The son leaned forward, grabbed his arms, grabbed his father by the neck and by the shoulders, and he leaned forward as much as he could. Then, with his son on his back, the father climbed up the ladder on the aircraft. That moment took me back some 40 years when I began my journey as a disabled veteran. At that time, during those years, I too was carried. When I thought that I could not take another step, when I thought that everything was so dark, when I thought that I had not a future, when I thought that I could not continue my life, I was carried. Now, you might ask, why do I share this story with you? Because what we are doing today, breaking ground for this memorial, is a direct reflection of all disabled veterans and their journeys that began when they answered the call to duty. Those journeys continue throughout their honorable service, through the trauma of injuries, and it continues today through their recovery and their renewal of purpose. What that father did for his son in Indianapolis that day clearly demonstrated that he would never abandon his son. This memorial that you are building clearly demonstrates that the American people will never abandon our nation's disabled veterans. Within full view of the Capitol, the American Veterans Disabled for Life Memorial will be a poignant reminder that our nation has a duty, as the Speaker and the Secretary have pointed out, that our nation has a responsibility, those who have given so much of themselves. All who serve share the horror, the brutality, and the hardships of defending our nation, especially true in wartime. All have given of themselves. some to great degrees. The memorial is intended to bring a greater awareness of what disabled veterans have already sacrificed for us. But more than that, the American Veterans Disabled for Life Memorial is also a tribute to what disabled veterans can accomplish. Disabled veterans know the challenges of rebuilding and resuming productive lives. They have not only overcome their disabilities, but they have excelled in life. Those before you today, those of you who are out in the audience, are the fine examples of what I am sharing with you. The memorial will not only honor the disabled veterans of all 5 branches of service. By the way, happy birthday, Marines. It will also educate the public and remind the nation about vital issues concerning disabled veterans, because the American public cannot be allowed to simply forget disabled veterans once the wars have ended, and then the media turns their attention to other topics. Throughout our history, we have erected monuments to our heroes, and we see that in this city. That traditional display of admiration for valor has come up short in honoring America's disabled veterans who continue to bear the deepest wounds and the scars of war long after the guns have fallen silent. By honoring these men and women, this memorial will be a solemn declaration that America is forever grateful to her disabled veterans. A declaration that America will never forget their service and will never forget their continued sacrifice. With the generous support of you, the organizations, the American Veterans Disabled for Life Memorial will soon become one of our nation's most treasured landmarks. Thanks again to each of you who have joined us in this journey. Together, we are making this dream a reality. And I take great pride on behalf of all our nation's disabled veterans. From deep within our hearts, we say, thank you, America. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. What a wonderful, moving reflection of what this memorial truly means. In 1998, Lois Pope joined forces with DAV National Adjutant Art Wilson and the late Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Jesse Brown, to create the Disabled Veterans Life Memorial Foundation. It is her fondest wish to honor the more than 3 million living disabled veterans, including recently disabled veterans who served in the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as all of those throughout our history. The American Veterans Disabled for Life Memorial is scheduled to be completed and dedicated in 2012. One of America's leading philanthropists, Mrs. Pope and her private charitable foundations have provided awards for medical research, scholarship, camp programs, summer camp programs, humanitarian relief, the performing arts, and animal welfare. It is my great, great pleasure to introduce the driving force, the heart and soul behind the American Veterans Disabled for Life Memorial. A lady of uncommon vision and dedication, Mrs. Lois Pope, founder and president of the Disabled Veterans Life Memorial Foundation.
Good morning. It's great to be here, and it's great to have all of you here with us this morning. As it is done for decades, Our nation will pay tribute tomorrow, November 11th, to our veterans for the tremendous sacrifices they have made for our people and for our way of life. And today, here in the shadow of the United States Capitol, we break ground on a memorial that will honor the 3 million living disabled veterans and the millions who have died, and tragically, all those who will come because of the war on terrorism. The hundreds of disabled veterans who are with us this morning represent all their brothers and sisters. They are soldiers of every race, every creed, every color, who have been severely and severely injured while defending our freedom. Far too often, they have been neglected, suffering long after the battle has been won and the guns have grown silent. This ceremony is just a first step, a small part of repaying what we owe them. In the 1940s, our veterans saved children dying of their war wounds, liberated the victims of Nazi oppression, helped sustain those in wartime prisons, and freed a continent and the world from the yoke of tyranny. In the 1950s, they were our warriors on the battlefields in Korea. In the 60s and 70s, they fought in the marshlands and jungles of Vietnam. In the 80s and 90s, they served our nation in the hot spots around the world, Grenada, Bosnia, and elsewhere. And today, they are defending us in the global war on terrorism. Since the beginning of this conflict, tens of thousands of men and women have been wounded in action. Some, thank God, were minor wounds, but far too many of these brave men and women will carry their scars and their disabilities for life. We owe them so much, and we can never thank them enough. But the American Veterans Disabled for Life Memorial will go a long way to showing our admiration, our respect, and our gratitude. Our journey to get this moment of groundbreaking began in 1998 when I met with Jesse Brown, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and with Art Wilson, the National Adjutant and Chief Executive, CEO of the Disabled American Veterans. Together, we formed the Disabled Veterans Life Memorial Foundation and began our 12-year effort to build this permanent public tribute to these unsung heroes. My personal commitment to veterans actually began decades before that, and I won't tell you how many because those of you who are good in math could figure out how old I am. I was a singer back then and was performing for a group of Vietnam-era soldiers at the Rusk Rehabilitation Institute in New York. Seeing them there and realizing how much each had given to our country is when I made a promise that if ever I had the financial means to do more than just visit and entertain, I would do all in my power to honor their service in a more meaningful way. Fast forward to 1995, when I was at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial to remember my first cousin who had died in that war. When I asked a park ranger to point out to me where the memorial was for disabled veterans was located, he told me that no such memorial existed. I said, there has to be one. He pulled up a map, and he said, well, there's the Washington, the Jefferson, there's the Lincoln, the Korean, but there's no memorial for disabled veterans. That was the moment when I realized what my life's purpose would be, to build a memorial to you, disabled veterans, to make sure that you and your sacrifices will always be remembered, and to teach our children to teach our children and our grandchildren and all generations to come about the human cost of war. Today, that dream is one step closer to becoming a reality. To borrow a phrase from Abraham Lincoln, the world will little note nor remember what I have said here today, but we will never forget what you have done for the land that we love and our liberty. Thank you, disabled veterans. Thank you for all your sacrifices that you've made for our freedom and our democracy, the American way of life. God bless America.
Thank you, Mrs. Pope, for making this day possible and for your very, very moving words. Our next guest first caught the attention of the veterans community by his sensitive, respectful, and utterly unforgettable role as a double amputee Vietnam combat veteran in the widely acclaimed movie Forrest Gump. That character, Lieutenant Dan, has become legendary. It is my great, great pleasure to introduce Gary Sinise.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Oh, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning. What a day. They asked me to try to explain a little bit why have been involved, and so I'm going to attempt to do that for those of you that might not know. President John Adams once said, "You will never know how much it cost my generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make good use of it." Since the beginning of our great democracy, throughout many generations, the young people we have sent off to war have paid an enormous price so that we may live in freedom. So many have paid with their lives. Far too many have paid with parts of their bodies, and in some cases, their minds. Indeed, of the more than 26 million veterans living today, over 3 million are permanently disabled from injuries suffered in our nation's defense. Unfortunately, many of these brave heroes have not been treated as they should. Far too many have been marginalized or even forgotten altogether. Now, coming from a family where a number of relatives have proudly worn the various uniforms of our armed services, I've learned from them about the tragedies and triumphs of war. My grandfather served in the Army in World War I, driving an ambulance on the front lines in France. My two uncles served in World War II, one with the Navy in the Pacific and the other as a navigator on a B-17 bomber, flying and surviving 30 missions over Europe. My father served in the Navy in the 1950s. My wife's two brothers both served in the Army and fought in Vietnam. One was a helicopter pilot, the other an infantry officer who graduated from West Point, served 2 tours in Vietnam, went on to become a lieutenant colonel. A born leader, he rewrote the leadership manual for the United States Army before he passed away from cancer at age 39 while serving at Fort Leavenworth. I spent a lot of time talking and learning about the Vietnam War from him. My wife's sister was in the Army for 10 years, retired as a captain, and her son, my nephew, just returned from Afghanistan, an infantryman with the 82nd Airborne. I did not serve myself, but I'm especially proud of my family members who have. In the early 1980s, I had the honor of directing a play in Chicago that was written by a group of Vietnam veterans. It was based on their experiences during that war. The time spent with these veterans, along with my wife's 2 brothers and another brother-in-law who was a medic in Vietnam, left a lasting impression on me, and I have committed my time and energies to veterans ever since. Then in 1993, I had the distinct honor of portraying a disabled Vietnam veteran on screen. Having spent so much time with veterans, I felt I was well prepared and eager to play the role of Lieutenant Dan in the film Forrest Gump. Such moments are rare for an actor. Playing this role changed me and educated me about the strength and character of our disabled veterans. The story of Lieutenant Dan is a hopeful and positive story of triumph over adversity. He is driven by his desire to serve and to devote his life in service to his country. When he is severely injured and his dream of becoming a great officer is altered, he goes through understandable pain and anger, but he eventually learns to accept and live with his disability. In the end, he finds peace. The final image is one of great power. Lieutenant Dan is standing strong and proud. He has put his injury in perspective and has moved on. Now, probably the ultimate recognition for an actor is winning an Oscar, but for me, it was another award that holds the most cherished spot in my heart. That honor came in 1994 from the Disabled American Veterans, which cited me at its national convention for my portrayal of Lieutenant Dan. It was a great moment. And standing in front of thousands of these heroes that night, men and women who will never have the same opportunity to stand, I could not have been more moved. Yes, it was heart-wrenching, but it was also heartwarming. Through the DAV, I have met many veterans with catastrophic injuries. But despite their disabilities, like Lieutenant Dan, they demonstrated an unflinching will, not just to survive, but to flourish. I was so inspired from that first introduction the night of their national convention that from that moment on, I have stayed actively involved with the DAV and was honored and humbled several years ago when Art Wilson asked me to become the national spokesperson for the American Veterans Disabled for Life Memorial. I'm privileged to have helped raise money, done public service announcements to promote the effort, and for the past 5 years, my band, the Lieutenant Dan Band, has performed at the DAV's national convention. Starting in 2003, after we went into Afghanistan and Iraq 3 or 4 times a year. Since then, I have visited our wounded at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, Bethesda Naval Hospital, Naval Medical Center, Balboa Park, San Diego, Landstuhl Medical Center in Germany, and various other hospitals here at home and overseas. On each of these visits, I am struck by the humility of the young men and women receiving treatment, their courage and determination, their acceptance, and their dedication to our country and their fellow warriors. Lending a hand to these brave men and women is truly one of the most rewarding things I have done in my life. And for all they have done and all they have sacrificed, they don't ask much in return. Knowing they are not forgotten and that their sacrifice is appreciated makes a world of difference. And that's why we're here today, to make a world of difference. Now, war is not like what you see in the movies or on TV. War is very real. And while many of these disabled veterans have adjusted to their disabilities, there will always be a constant reminder of the hell they went through. A reminder that they and their caregivers live with each and every day. They may have vanquished our nation's enemies, but their personal enemy, lives defined by their disabilities, afflictions, and physical and emotional scars, remains constant and permanent. We cannot give them back their real arms and legs. We cannot give them back their eyes, their ears, pieces of themselves that have been lost, the minds that have been altered. But we can give them, and we must give them, our respect and our everlasting appreciation. For me personally, being part of this memorial effort and my involvement as its national spokesperson is a way of saying thank you to my family and friends who have served, and to the thousands of disabled veterans I have met during my visits to hospitals, rehabilitation centers, and through the Disabled American Veterans Organization, meeting and getting to know so many of you has made me not just a better actor, you have made me a better man. And to the millions of disabled veterans who have served, it will be a way for all of us, this memorial, to say thank you to all of them, as it will be our lasting tribute to ensure that these sacrifices are always remembered. Calvin Coolidge once said, "A nation which forgets its defenders will itself be forgotten." And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why the American Veterans Disabled for Life Memorial is so essential. It is more than the nation's first public tribute to more than 3 million living disabled veterans and the countless hundreds of thousands who have died. It will show America's eternal gratitude to the men and women whose lives were forever changed in service to our country and in the cause of freedom. America cannot and will not forget its defenders. It has been my privilege to serve in this effort. Thank you to all of you who have contributed to making this dream that Lois, Art, and Jesse had years ago into a reality today. God bless you and God bless America. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Dan. We owe you an enormous debt of gratitude for all you've done for our men and women in uniform and our nation's veterans. It is indeed a privilege to introduce our next speaker. Secretary Shinseki graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point. Now, as a Naval Academy graduate, in a few weeks, Secretary Shinseki and I will watch the big game in Philadelphia. And whoever wins that contest, the young men, like Secretary Shinseki, shortly after the game is over, will put on the uniform, and many will go off and serve in Afghanistan and Iraq. Secretary Shinseki served 2 combat tours in Vietnam, where he was twice wounded. And as a disabled veteran, he remained on active duty. During his military career, he served as Commanding General, United States Army Europe, and 7th Army, Commanding General, NATO Land Forces, Central Europe, and Commander of the NATO-led Stabilization Force in Bosnia. In 1999, General Shinseki was appointed Chief of Staff of the Army and retired in 2003 after 38 years of service in uniform. On December 7, 2008, he was nominated by President Barack Obama to lead the Department of Veterans Affairs and was confirmed by the United States Senate on January 20th, 2009. And it was sworn in as the 7th Secretary of Veterans Affairs on January 21st, 2009. Ladies and gentlemen, Secretary of Veterans Affairs and DAV Life member, Eric K. Shinseki.
Well, Tony, thank you very much for that very kind introduction and also for your past leadership as Secretary of VA, great leadership. Let me also wish all the Marines present a happy birthday and then promise all of you that cheer for Navy a good accounting in a couple of weeks when Army and Navy show up in Philly. Let me further acknowledge Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi. Madam Speaker, thank you for honoring us with your presence here today. Thanks for your leadership. Along with President Obama, you and the leadership of the Congress have done tremendous work for veterans this year. We're indebted to you. Senator Bob Dole, I believe, was trying to be here, a distinguished soldier and statesman, and always great to have an opportunity to share time with him, as I did last week as he was looking forward to being released from Walter Reed, where he had undergone some surgery. Ambassador Gary Doer from Canada, and other distinguished guests from Canada. Thank you for being here this morning, and thank you also for the generosity of the reception and luncheon following these ceremonies. Members of the VA team who are here today, thank you all for what you do. I'll add my thanks to Chairwoman Lois Pope, to President Art Wilson, to National Spokesman Gary Sinise, and all the other wonderful members of the American Veteran Disabled for Life Memorial Foundation for all of your work, your devotion, your efforts to put together this wonderful project. Scott Brown is here. Scott's dad has been mentioned several times already, former Secretary of Veterans Affairs Jesse Brown, who signed the original agreement with Lois and with Art Wilson. Bobby Barrera, I always learn something whenever you get up and speak in public. Thanks for your leadership. Thanks for your wonderful example of what disabled veterans mean to this country and what, with will and determination, what we accomplish. Thanks to also to the other veteran service organizations who are represented here today. You all have contributed to making this memorial a reality, along with the DAV. Most importantly, please join me in recognizing the disabled veterans who are here in the audience, and there are several hundred of us. Thank you all. I think you know it, but it bears repeating. This ceremony and this memorial are all about you, acknowledging your service, honoring your sacrifice. Other distinguished guests I may have missed, fellow veterans, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to join you this morning to break ground on a project that's sure to enhance Washington's landscape, as well as the symbolism reflected in its landmarks and monuments. Our deepest thanks again go to Lois Pope, who as chair of the Disabled for Life Memorial Foundation has created legions of supporters all across the country for this noble and worthy idea. With passion and energy, she has been the engine behind the enormous effort to honor men and women of every generation who have given so much, for some everything short of life itself, for our democracy. Ms. Pope, again, thank you. George Marshall, our great soldier statesman, once described the value of America's defenders. It's impossible, he said, for the nation to compensate for the services of a fighting man, or today, a fighting woman. There is no pay scale that is high enough to bring the services of a single one of them, to buy the services of a single one of them during even a few minutes of the agony of combat, the physical miseries of the campaign, or the extreme personal inconvenience of leaving home to go to the most dangerous spots on earth to serve our nation. America's always been blessed with sons and daughters imbued with that unwavering sense of purpose to something greater than self, that steadfast sense of duty to a nation that we all love. Our power as a nation derives from that persevering, buoyant, free-bred national spirit that has led so many to give what President Abraham Lincoln called that last full measure of devotion to safeguard our principles, namely life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As it was at Lexington and Concord, it is still today. From Bunker Hill to Baghdad, from Basra to Kabul, Kandahar, and points beyond. The price of liberty has been paid through the vigilance and valor of young Americans who put principle and ideal before self-interest, comfort, or safety. All too often, their noble service ended in life-altering injury. Stark reminders, physical, emotional, and spiritual, as Gary alluded to. Stark reminders of freedom's costs. By any measure, there are few who have given more to our country than the 3 million disabled veterans living amongst us. The creation of this memorial is fitting tribute to patriots who answered the call of duty and who have, in the face of devastating injury, showed us a quality of courage at which we can only marvel. Here in the shadow of our nation's capital, the American Veterans Disabled for Life Memorial will stand as an enduring tribute to the towering courage, selfless sacrifice, and steadfast loyalty of all of our disabled veterans. In the future, its imposing granite walls and cypress trees symbolize the strength of their warrior heritage. The reflecting pool and star-shaped fountain will mirror and reaffirm their heroism, and its eternal flame will ensure that the passage of time will not dim the memory of such selfless service. I extend to America's disabled veterans deep personal regards and profound respect for your sacrifice. On behalf of the Department of Veterans Affairs, I offer you our respect and admiration for your service and for your courage in living life every day. And on behalf of President Barack Obama, I extend to you the heartfelt thanks, great respect and dignity for you from your Commander-in-Chief. May God bless those who serve and have served in our nation's armed forces, and may God continue to bless this wonderful country of ours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your inspiring words. And now the moment we've all been waiting for. May I have our distinguished groundbreakers take their place. Ladies and gentlemen, please break ground. May return to our seats. Thank you very, very much.
Leaders of the Presidential Commission looking into ways